Over the next two summers, there are no fewer than 7 player contracts expiring at West Ham United. In the summer of 2026, the contracts of Callum Wilson, Adama Traore, Lucas Fabianski, and on loan defender Axel Disasi will all come to an end. And then in the summer of 2027, as it stands, the contracts of Tomas Soucek, Alphonse Areola, and Maxwell Cornet will also come to an end. Now, we've already heard stories that apparently Callum Wilson has agreed to an extended 1 year deal. Should we stay in the Premier League? That's the premise, if we stay in the Premier League. And that Axel Disasi is also keen to talk about a permanent move from Chelsea to West Ham, again, if we survive the dreaded drop into the Championship. Now, my understanding on Disasi is that conversations have already started with Chelsea about that, but I don't know. It may be something will be agreed in principle, and if we do stay up, then it will be ratified. If not, then I'm sure we won't be agreeing to a deal if we go down for Disasi to stay. It's widely regarded that or accepted that Lucas Fabianski would not be offered yet another 1 year extension to his contract, and especially with the rise of Finlay Herrick. I know he made a bit of a boo-boo in the National League Cup final, but he made some absolutely fantastic saves, which is why he's highly regarded. You know, I think Finlay Herrick is the sort of player that will actually rise from the development squad into the senior squad, probably as third choice keeper next season. So that means Fabianski is highly unlikely to have a new contract offer himself. But the jury's still out on the likes of Adama Traore, Alphonse Areola, and Tomas Soucek as to whether they will be still at West Ham United when next season and the season after is done. Look, if you're new to this channel, if you're first time you're watching to this channel, or if you've watched me before but yet to become a subscriber, the QR code there will take you to the subscription page. It's free of charge to subscribe. Why not subscribe? If you enjoy the channel, if you like the channel, if you like the content, then hit the subscribe button. If you do like the content of today's show, click the like button after the show, and there's also a hype button that you can also click on, which elevates the video, allows other people to watch. Right, so I said the jury is out on Traore, Areola, and Soucek as to whether they will still be at the club when their contracts expire. With the financial news that was recently reported of £104 million losses, we've been told that player sales are highly likely, or not highly likely, without a shadow of a doubt, definite. And when it comes to player sales, the chances of someone like Alphonse Areola leaving the club this summer are quite high, especially given that he's fallen behind Mads Hermansen in the pecking order. Now, Areola is one of the highest earners at the club, and he's got 1 year left on his contract. So you can see quite possibly he will be sold this coming summer. Now, whilst fears that the likes of Matthias Fernandes, Jarrod Bowen and Crescencio Somerville will be sold, I'm fairly confident, as I said before, that if we stay in the Premier League and playing under Nuno next season, these three players will probably want to remain at the club. You know, Matthias Fernandes there'll be a high demand for that player, and so will there be for Crescencio Somerville. And there's still a lot of interest in Jarrod Bowen as well. Now, as I suggested before, a further clear out of players on the fringes of the club, the high earners on the fringes, will be the first to be targeted to be sold. They're going to be sold for a loss. There's no shadow of a doubt there. But at least it will get them off the payroll in order to ease that pressure, that financial pressure, so that we don't have to go and sell the likes of Fernandes and Somerville and Bowen. So there'll be a concerted effort to get, to move on the likes of James Ward-Prowse, Nicholas Füllkrug and Edson Alvarez on a permanent basis. They're all out on loan at the moment. But there are two players in particular who are high earners, but fans and probably the club itself are split as to whether they should be cashed in on or whether should be kept at the club. And those two players are, of course, Tomas Soucek and Jarrod Bowen. They both arrived at the club at the same time back in January 2020 when they saved us. They were, prominent in helping us stay in the league that season. And there's every chance that they could help us stay in the league at the end of this season and then bid farewell. Now, when it comes to Jarrod Bowen, I've talked about this recently. He still does have a contract until 2030, but with Paqueta gone, he's by far the highest earner at the club on 150 grand a week or so. Now, he turns 30 at the end of this season, and West Ham must be toying with the idea whether to stick or twist with him. In a lot of ways, it does make a lot of sense to sell him this summer and bring in a younger player who will replace him in that role that he does, and almost definitely be on a much lower wage than the money that Bowen is on. But Bowen is one of our West Ham icons. He's been superb from the club almost from day one, and we get attached to icons, don't we, and never want to see them leave. But there is a fair case to put selling him this coming summer. Now, I reiterate, this is on the premise that we don't get relegated. This is all based on if we stay in the Premier League. And then Bowen, plus many other players, if we do get relegated, would be sold anyway, to be honest with you. I can't call this one on Bowen. I'm torn as to whether we should or should not sell him. But it wouldn't be a shock either way, whether he's sold or whether he stays. Now, then it comes to Tomas Soucek, another high earner at the club on around 90 odd grand a week. And it was suggested last week that the 31-year-old will not be offered an extension of his contract that expires in 2027. So again, do we let the player run down his contract and leave for nothing in a season and a half's time? Or do we cash in on him this coming summer? Look, whether you agree with the player not being offered a new deal or not, we do have to be a lot bolder when it comes to players who are sort of getting a bit older and who have been at the club for a long time. We've done this before. We've got a whole host of players that we just kept held on to, and then it gets to a point where they're too old and they can't contribute and they're worth nothing and they leave for nothing. Look, Soucek has been a great servant, but our mistake has been to hold, maybe to have held on to him for as long as we have. It's suggested that David Moyes continues to be a big fan of the Czechia international, but I would hate for Soucek to sign for any other Premier League club. But I guess I would hate for any of our players to sign for another Premier League club, but it's possible. But whilst we have to scour the transfer market to find a decent replacement for Jarrod Bowen, have we already got a replacement at the club itself for Tomas Soucek? And the player I'm thinking about is Mohamadou Kante. He was an unknown source when he first arrived at West Ham in the summer. He was purchased by Tim Steidten the summer before, but was immediately loaned back to Paris FC so that he could help them win promotion in League One, back into League One. Now, circumstances at the French club changed in 2024. New owners, the Arnault family, who own Louis Vuitton, as well as Red Bull. New owners of the Arnault family are the major shareholders of the club, and then Red Bull has also bought a small stake in the club. Now, that ownership change resulted in Kante being benched for most of the promotion-chasing season, with a suggestion that the owners didn't want to further develop a player who was already had one foot out the door going to West Ham. Now, whether this is true or not, I couldn't honestly tell you. But is Kante a possible long-term successor to Tomas Soucek in this West Ham side? Look, we've seen the resurgence of Soucek in the past few months. Since our defeat against Wolves away from home, Soucek has been in the starting lineup ever since for every game. And he's played almost every minute apart from when he was subbed against Brentford in our 0-0 draw against them earlier in January. So in that time, Soucek has scored 2 goals in those last 10 games, but it's his presence and his experience that has shone through. The consummate professional. Soucek has always played with his heart on his sleeve, and he's demonstrated to West Ham fans his true quality. Suggests he's not quite finished at the club just yet. But what happens this coming summer? He's got a year left on his contract. He apparently not being offered a new one. Do we keep him or do we cash in on him? Look, after some extremely impressive performances for the under-21s, Mohamadou Kante earlier this season, since that early this season, has gone on to be part of the senior squad. He's been training with them, and now he's being picked on a regular basis on the squad, on the bench, and he's even getting some decent game time. He played in the cup ties. He was impressive against Brentford in the cup game against them, and he showed a level of maturity. Given his age of being just 20, he was extremely impressive. It looks like perhaps Tim Steidten did actually leave us with a decent parting gift in Mohamadou Kante. But would he be ready to replace Tomas Soucek if we sold Soucek in the summer? Well, the honest truth is probably, but not right away. I know that sounds a bit on the fence. We need a bit more strength in depth where Kante could be afforded more game time, but then share that game time with another decent midfielder until he becomes Kante, first choice midfielder, alongside Matthias Fernandes. Now, you would ask, well, Fernandes is only a year older or a year or two older, so if he can do it, why not Kante? I'm not suggesting he can't, but I just feel he's just slightly behind at this moment in time. And when you think for his age, Tomas Soucek, he's still got a decent engine on him. He's got great aerial dominance, great aerial presence, and he's great at making late runs into the box. But some of those things, Kante's got a great engine. He's certainly athletic and very mobile, and he's got decent composure, a lot of physicality, but he doesn't quite have that aerial dominance yet, given his height, and he doesn't seem to be sort of getting in the box. Mind you, I guess it's early days, but to get in the box to sort of get on the end of a few chances, he's still a bit raw. But what I've seen of him so far suggests that it ain't going to be that long before he does become an established first-team regular. Now, it's a shame, really, that we're fighting relegation, because I think if we weren't, perhaps he'd have been given more game time. But Nuno has done what Nuno think he needed to do, which is right, which is calling on the experienced players to get us out of the predicament that we're in. Hence, Soucek starting so many games of late. But it shows great trust in Kante when he was brought on against Man City for Bowen in the dying stages of that game. Sure, he was only on the pitch for a couple of minutes, but he was brought on to add some physicality to the midfield and to disrupt Man City's flow. And he did just that. But the other thing we need to take into consideration is that Soucek and Kante are kind of quite different players. They're not like for like. So replacing a Soucek type player with a Kante type player means maybe changing our tactics a little bit to accommodate Kante's style. He's a bit like an Amadou Onana of Aston Villa and Ibrahim Sangare of Nottingham Forest. And ironically, being likened to Sangare could only work in his favour because Sangare was coached by Nuno when they were both at Nottingham Forest. So he will know of Sangare's qualities, which could bode well for Kante, given that Kante is a similar player to him. Look, I like Kante. I like Soucek. I like to keep Soucek, and I like to see Kante develop as his understudy for another season. That might be the best outcome. But then you've got to consider, what do we do given our financial predicaments, that we're going to have to sell players, and Soucek might be the kind of player that I would understandably have to be sold in order to just balance the books a little bit. But is Kante a decent player to come in? Look, it's always difficult to replace an icon at West Ham United. And for me, Soucek has become somewhat of an icon.